Hi class, and welcome to your introduction to Fauvism and landscape painting. Your assignment is to create a landscape inspired by a place you have been. You will use a photo that you took as inspiration while on this vacation and paint it in the style of Fauvism. To fully understand how Fauvism came about, we need to revisit a very important art movement in our history, known as Impressionism. Impressionism was a radical art movement that developed in Paris during the late 1800s. The Impressionists rebelled against classical subject matter and embraced modernity, desiring to create works that reflected the world in which they lived. The group included a number of famous artists who became the most famous Impressionists, such as Marie Cassatt, Edgar Degas, Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Renoir, Sisley, and so many more. There's also a post-impressionist movement, and this movement included artists such as Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, and Paul Cézanne. Though this art movement is well loved today, during the late 19th century it was subjected to a good deal of scorn and ridicule. The Impressionists were characterized with many distinct qualities that separated them from the norm of the time. For example, the French Academy of Fine Arts dictated that works of art should showcase biblical, historical, or mythological events and subject matter. The artist would work in a studio with models, and it could take them many months to finish one painting. The Academy approved works were smooth with clean, hard edges and high contrast. They were painted realistically, using deep, rich colors and dark shadows. If an artist painted in this style, they were usually accepted into the famous annual Salon de Paris. On the other hand, the Impressionists painted everyday life, usually outdoors, and in one sitting. They painted rapidly and their canvases revealed brushstrokes, blurred edges, and thick paint application. They painted using unrealistic colors, usually pastels, attempting to capture atmospheric light in the moment. The artists who painted in this impressionistic style were often rejected from the salon and forced to showcase their art at their own exhibit of rejects. Between 1901 and 1906, several comprehensive exhibitions were held in Paris, making the work of Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, and Paul Cézanne, who were post-impressionists, widely accessible for the first time. These great artists inspired working artists to experiment with radical new styles, and a new movement was formed. This new movement was known as Fauvism. Fauvism was an art movement inspired by Impressionism centered in France, emphasizing painterly qualities and strong color over the representational or realistic values retained by Impressionism. The Fauvist characteristics that you should know include intense colors painted in an unrealistic way. They use pure, brilliant color applied straight from the paint tube. Sometimes they wouldn't even mix. They painted in an aggressive, direct manner to create a sense of an explosion on the canvas. And the Fauves painted directly from nature, just like the Impressionists did. The Fauvist paintings shocked visitors to the annual Salon of Autumn in Paris of 1905. One critic dubbed the painters "les fauves", meaning "wild beasts", and Fauvism stuck. Henri Matisse, who was born in 1869 and died in 1954, was a fine artist often regarded as the most important French painter of the 20th century. He was the leader of the Fauvist movement, and he pursued the expressiveness of color throughout his career. Matisse, whose parents were in the grain business, displayed little interest in art until he was about 20 years old. He studied law in Paris and became a law clerk. In 1890, while recovering from a severe attack of the appendicitis, he began to paint, at first copying the colored reproductions in a box of oils his mother had given him. Soon he was decorating the home of his grandparents' home, and in 1891 he abandoned law and returned to Paris to become a professional artist. Interesting facts about Matisse: he studied at private academies and with a variety of masters, and in 1896 he exhibited 4 paintings at the Salon. He was elected as an associate member of the Salon Society, and his woman reading, as seen here, painted in 1894, was purchased by the government. This gave him confidence to be more venturesome, and on his travels he met an impressionist named Pissarro. Through Pissarro, he discovered a series of Impressionist masterpieces, and his work soon began to take a step towards stylistic liberation, and the painting, The Dinner Table, as seen here, caused a minor scandal at the Salon. Just a few years later, you can see how Matisse's style drastically changed from Salon-approved subject matter and style to something avant-garde and deeply disliked. Matisse painted this unusual portrait of his wife in 1905. The green stripe down the center of Emile Matisse's face acts as an artificial shadow line and divides the face in the conventional portrait style with a light and dark side. Matisse divides the face chromatically with a cool and a warm side. The natural light is translated directly into colors, and the highly visual brushstrokes add to the sense of artistic drama. Although Matisse received a lot of hate for his new style of art, today his paintings sell for over $17 million. Andre Derain was another French painter, sculptor, printmaker, and designer who was one of the principal Fauvists. He studied painting in Paris at the same academy as Matisse from 1898 to 1899. He developed his early style in association with Maurice de Vlaminck, another artist who we'll look at in a moment, whom he met in 1900, and with Henri Matisse. Together with these two painters, Derain was one of the major exponents of Fauvism from 1905 to 1908. Like the other artists who worked in this style, he painted landscapes and figure studies in brilliant, sometimes pure colors, and used broken brushstrokes and compulsive lines to define his spontaneous compositions. Today, his paintings sell for over $6 million. The third Fauvist I'd like to share with you is Maurice de Vlaminck, and he was noted for his brash temperament and broad interests. He was at various times a musician, an actor, a racing cyclist, and a novelist. He was also a self-taught artist who proudly shunned academic training aside from drawing lessons. In 1900, Vlaminck met the painter Derain during a train accident, and the two shared a studio from 1900 to 1901. Derain introduced Vlaminck to Henri Matisse, and Vlaminck was soon experimenting with pure, intense color drawn straight from the tube and applied in thick daubs. He exhibited with Matisse and Derain in 1905 at the Salon of Independence and at the controversial group show at the Salon of Autumn. It was at the latter exhibition that the critics called these artists fauves, meaning wild beasts. He considered their canvases of bold color applied in a spontaneous and impulsive manner too unrefined. Vlaminck usually preferred a palette of primary colors, as seen here. Here are the three artists side by side. You can see how similar their works are. Bright colors, colors straight out of the tube, You can see every mark made by the paintbrush, simplified forms, everyday objects and landscapes, very unrealistic, very avant-garde. Here's another example of a landscape by Matisse. So now we're going to look at landscapes. You will paint a landscape in the style of the Fauves using any wet medium. It could be acrylic, watercolor, tempera paint. It could even be an unconventional art material, maybe nail polish, for example, or food coloring. So what is a landscape? Landscapes are one of the three most popular subjects in art. Remember, the three most popular subjects are portraits and still lifes, along with landscapes. Landscape art is a depiction of natural scenery such as mountains, valleys, trees, seascapes, rivers, etc. The earliest forms of pure landscapes without any figures were seen in frescoes from Greece in 1500 BCE. Landscape backgrounds for figures or landmarks can still form an important part of the artwork and can still be considered landscapes as well. In a landscape, sky is almost always included in the view, and weather is often an element of the composition. Here is two different examples of landscapes. So, how can you make a successful landscape? Your composition should be broken down into three sections always. You should have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. Use perspective. Objects should get smaller in the distance. In the foreground, they should be larger. In the background, they should be smaller. Also, work from life. Observation is always key. The Impressionists would take out their paints, set up their canvas outside, and paint from direct observation. In this case, we can't always paint a landscape from direct observation, so you will use a photo instead. Before you begin painting, you need to plan the composition carefully. Remember, composition refers to the way objects are arranged on the page. All these famous landscape paintings use perspective and overlapping really well. They have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. They're well balanced. The objects aren't heavy on one side, and you don't have empty space on another side. Another tip, things should get less distinct, lighter, and hazier as they get further away into the distance. We call this atmospheric perspective. Another tip, a unique sky and a lot of detail in the foreground will help add interest to your landscape. Look at how interesting these skies are. Can you guess which ones are painted by Impressionists? The more layers, values, textures, and overlapping, the better. You can do a lot more with paint and color than you can with pencil. Now, the project requirements are that you first think of a place you've been before and choose a challenging landscape. It needs to be your own photo to recreate in the Fauve style. Think of a landscape that you have taken that's more than just sky and horizon. Make sure your reference photo has foreground, middle ground, and background, and your composition is strong. Use a variety of different paint techniques to add interest and texture in the Fauve style. For example, you could do stippling, color mixing, blending, layering, etc. Capture the Fauve style by using unrealistic colors, simplified forms, and show your marks. We will be looking at your creativity, your effort, and your craftsmanship. Here are the process steps. First, choose your reference photo. Here's my photo. It's a photo I took while in Yosemite on a hiking trail. Next, create as many sketches as needed to achieve a strong composition. In my sketchbook, I referred to the photo and I created a sketch based on what I saw. Next, use pencil to lightly draw your landscape on final paper. The medium I chose for this project was acrylic and I had canvas, so I drew my image, my landscape, directly onto the canvas lightly. Now, I know using acrylic that you have to layer acrylic in order to make it thick enough, opaque enough that you don't see the pencil lines. So I tried to draw lightly first, knowing that I'm going to have to use a lot of layers to hide those pencil lines. So keep that in mind. When you do start painting, begin painting with the background first. When we paint, we usually work from the background to the middle ground, and then the foreground is the last thing we touch. So in my case, I started with the sky. You can see the marks that I left in the background to capture that Fauvism style. Then I began to paint the mountains and the rocks, and then the last thing I would do are the trees, which are in the foreground. You can see in the image on the left that the pencil lines are showing through. This is just my first layer. So I laid down color, you can still see the pencil lines, and then when that dried, I went over it a second, sometimes a third time to make sure those pencil lines are not showing. Definitely consider that while you're painting. And this is the completed painting. I hope that you guys have fun and you enjoy the painting process, and we cannot wait to see what you create.